Well, hello everyone. Rick again. This is part 2 of our teaching on a theology of place. And in part 1, I described that a theology of place tells us how God calls his people to be a faithful presence in the particular places that he puts them. And this came up as a question that we want to think about as a congregation, in part because someone asked us, can I rent your building? Can I use your building during the week? And we were reflecting on the reality that our building is often unused many hours of the day. We were starting to think, how might we bless the community with it? As a newer person in this community myself, and as a newer person at Midtown, I've just been thinking a lot about the stories that Corey's told me already about the history of our church. And one of those stands out to me, that the group that sold the church to Midtown, the people who sold it to us really gave it to us at a pretty great price, made it really affordable to us. And why'd they do that? Well, it's because they wanted that building to remain and be a church. It's really encouraging to me because actually, if you do some research across cities in the United States, there are many, many church buildings, especially historic church buildings in city areas that are being transformed into bars, restaurants, apartments, nightclubs. In fact, if you look up things that city planners have to say about churches, they largely don't like them. They prefer, in urban areas, places with what they would say is higher traffic, a coffee shop, a restaurant, a grocery store, people who are going in and out all day regularly. Those are the meaningful areas of a city, the places that have high traffic, where there's involvement with one another, where there's commerce going on. And sadly, for the majority of churches, even in cities that are busy, so often the church has now become a place where people are not going in and out throughout the week, even if that used to be more the norm in the past. So even city planners, unless they're Christians, don't seem to really favor churches in the city. They consider them dead zones. They're areas without enough traffic, without the people of the city truly engaging. And this matters to us. We want to think about this because our building is in a great location and in a good spot. In fact, you could say that churches really started to change shape after World War II. If you do some history on the churches and the buildings that are created, one, you certainly see an architectural difference, where our church, for example, Midtown, being nearly 100 years old, has fantastic doors. Have you stopped and just looked at the doors to go in and out on the front steps? The doors like that, with all their craftsmanship and the stained glass, of course, that we have, are meant to draw the eye, to tell us that something of significance is happening here. These aren't just your normal gym doors, right? They're metal, they're safe, they lock, and they're done. We could get those doors. We could have those doors on our church. Many churches do, and most newer churches put those on because they're cheaper and they work. But that's very much the state of how even our architecture shows us sometimes what we're like as a people of God. We just want pragmatic things that work. Those things wrong with that. I've been a part of those churches. The last church I was in had doors like that. But there's something powerful about it when you have a church with these kind of doors and stained glass windows that is right up pretty close to the sidewalk. It's unique because many churches that were built after World War II are what we call insular churches versus embedded churches. Our church is an embedded church. Its doors come almost right up to the sidewalk. We are on a street corner, which is pretty classic in a city. In fact, the reason why many churches are on the street corners, whether it's downtown or in a city neighborhood, is because it's part of the symbolic meaning of the church. The church was meant to anchor the block. It's meant to be a place that says, we're holding the corner down. This is a place of strength, a place of stability, a place where people can come in hard times and good to worship the Lord and find that He is their strength. Literally where the buildings are placed. If you ever noticed in cities, many, many times, churches are on corners. There's a symbolic meaning to that. The architecture is meant to have a symbolic meaning. versus an insular church, which now, if you were to take a picture of our church or an embedded church, what you'd see is a church, and you'd always see businesses or houses, street corners, all right there. There's a lot in the frame. But if you look at an insular church is much more like the suburb church, or the churches that are built kind of with nothing around them, and then they're surrounded by a massive parking lot. One of the major differences between embedded churches and insular churches is that people would walk to an embedded church. So the parking lot's usually very small or maybe non-existent. If you look at our parking lot, compared to the mega church parking lot that I know of in West Lafayette and Lafayette, where I used to live, one of the larger churches there, they have a huge parking lot because everyone drives there. Their church is on a big piece of land, and there's nothing else really around it. So we're an embedded church. Now, both churches can do fantastic work in the community. Just because we're on a street corner doesn't mean that we are putting all of our assets to use for the good of our community. And just because someone's in an insular church, in fact, many insular churches are doing some great thinking about what it means to truly engage with their local communities. But we're thinking about this because of our placement. And we want to be asking questions like, as an embedded church, as a church that is right in a neighborhood at 56th and Broadway with many houses around, with College Avenue on one side and Central on the other, we're in a prime location. And we want to ask questions about how we can love our neighbors. Not only are we supposed to live in the place where you are planted, as we talked about last time from Genesis 1, we're called by God through marriage, work, wisdom, and worship to be anchored in a place, planted in a place, or to do that in the whole world. But then in Genesis 2, we're planted in a particular place. We're to live for him, and the only thing we can do is live within the limits of this body and our local church body and this local place. We're limited beings. That's all we have. And if we're to do that, God calls us to be a faithful presence in the particular places he puts us. It's our definition of a theology of place. And we're acknowledging then that wherever we're located, God has called us and placed us there with a particular purpose, to be a kingdom of priests, to help other people see God's kingdom, his reign over all things in life, and a holy nation, a holy people, to reflect the very character of God. We said from Genesis chapter 1 that being made in the image and likeness of God means that you and I are to be God's concrete resemblances. We're to resemble God, the spiritual, unseen, omnipresent, meaning he's everywhere, God. We are his hands and feet, his face per se, in this particular place. People are to see God through us. But not just you and me as individuals, but us as a community. And before I get into asking a number of questions that I want to invite you with your family, your community group, with other church members to think about, I want to reflect on one other passage with you briefly. And it's a very important passage in the book of Jeremiah. And in that prophecy, Jeremiah has the incredibly daunting and hard task of going to these Israelites who'd been dragged out of their homes, dragged out of their place, taken out of Jerusalem, their home, their place, their particular location where they were called to be God's people. We see that because they're dragged off into exile by the Babylonians, they now live in Babylon. They live in the enemy city. They're dragged off there. And you might wonder, well, what are they going to do now? Can they possibly live faithfully to God? Can they be a faithful presence when they've been stripped of everything that was uniquely theirs, been dragged off and captured? It looks like in the ancient world where everyone believed in the gods, it looked like their God had lost. Yahweh had lost. You just got sacked by another city. Surely your God isn't good and powerful and gracious. Surely your God can't defend you. That's what the Babylonians would have said to them. They mocked them. They would have mocked the Israelites. And Jeremiah is sent with a letter to these Babylonian exiles, to the Israelites exiled to Babylon, taken out of their homes, put in a new land that they, different language, different culture, different gods, different clothing, different food, everything would be different. And he has a letter for them. And in Jeremiah 29, here's what it says, starting in verse 4, Jeremiah 29, verse 4. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I've sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Pause. Verse 4. Do you see that? The Babylonians came, they took the Israelites, they dragged them off, they took them out of their homes, they killed some of them, they captured many. But then God says, to you, these exiles, whom I sent into exile. For you and me, the Israelites being dragged to Babylon would almost be like you and I being captured and brought to an Al-Qaeda camp. That might be an overstatement, but given the animosity between Babylon and Jerusalem, I'm not sure that it is. And the Babylonians were a brutal people who did terrible things in battle to others. And to be dragged off into their place as their captured people is not a good thing. God now says, oh, I sent you there. I've sent you. I've sent you to that place. Verse 5. Jeremiah 29, verse 5. What does he tell them to do? What would you expect? What would God say to you if you were being dragged off to a place you really would rather not be? I can think, when I first moved to West Lafayette, Indiana from St. Louis, I thought, this is the most Midwest place I've ever lived. It's the smallest place I've ever lived as well, the smallest city. And I had to pray a lot. Lord, even if I end up hating this place, because personally it doesn't fit my preferences, I pray that you would give me a love for the people and a love for this place. And I can tell you that it was challenging. It was very different for me. It took me a long time to feel like I gained friends and that I was fitting into that place. This is what God says to the Babylonian exiles. So I wasn't in exile. These people are in exile. Build houses, live in them, plant gardens, eat the produce, take wives, have sons and daughters, take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there, do not decrease, but seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. God says, I've sent you. I've sent you to your enemies, your worst enemies. And what I want you to do is not hide, not decrease, not stop doing the things you've done before. In fact, what I want you to do, make your home there. Build houses, plant gardens, get married. When you have kids, raise them. Then get your kids married in that place. I want you then, not only that, to seek the welfare of the city. And so we could break Jeremiah's speech, his letter that he's telling on behalf of God to the people in exile, into two different parts. The first part is his instructions with the domestic private realm. The exiles are to build homes, take care of their yards, raise their children, plant gardens, make meals. These are simple instructions to just validate the everyday work that you and I do in our homes, nurturing children, creating hospitable environments of welcome for our families and our neighbors and our close friends. But the second thing Jeremiah does is he does not stop with the private realm. God doesn't stop with just say, well, just take care of your own stuff. Just make sure you care for your own, okay? That's what it means to be a faithful presence, even in a hard place, even if you're in a difficult time, a chaotic season, a challenging environment. Just make sure, just take care of yourself. He refuses to stop there. In fact, he says, not only must you take care of your own home and family and all of that, and make a hospitable place for people to live, he actually says that I need you to go outside of your homes. Stand on your threshold, the threshold of your door, and look out into the vast world, the vast city in front of you, this place that he there in Babylon. Step outside your front doors, and I want you to know I have important instructions for you in public, not just in private. To be faithful, a faithful presence means, he says, seek the welfare of the city. And the word seek suggests intentional action, to leave your homes, not just, yes, they're going to leave their homes by necessity to trade or to do some work out in the world, to procure goods and services and all that stuff. These things would be done by anybody without the command of God or a prophet in the Old Testament. But by instructing them to seek to seek something, Jeremiah is telling them to enter the public realm of their city with a very particular sense of purpose, that they are in that particular place with a particular purpose. And the criteria that he's giving them to shape this intentional purpose is described as seek the welfare, or the Old Testament Hebrew word is shalom. Shalom, which often gets translated peace, but it's a little more than just you and I individually being kind to others. So what Jeremiah is not saying here, he's not saying be a nice person, do some random acts of kindness periodically. Seeking shalom is actually a community word. It means it requires us as the Christian community to enter into the other human communities around us. Seek the welfare of your city. Now, how much more is this true if not only of Babylon, in a hated place, a difficult place in the ancient world, but in all places then? If we're to do it there, are we not to do it everywhere? Other passages would tell us so, but I want to point out three things that come of this then. To seek the welfare of your city means, first, of course, take care of your family unit. This is take care of your domestic life. Operate within the private realm in such a way that your family is cared for, that you're producing, your house is hospitable, you have food to eat, you're taking care of and raising your children. All of that is first order business of discipleship, of walking with God, of being a faithful presence in a place, especially in our world where the family is generally seen now as falling apart. That's the first thing. But we must never stop. We're not permitted to stop at the threshold of our own doorway. But our faithfulness is never simply private, but public. It is personal. And it does impact our private realm, but it is absolutely public as well. So another community that we're called into is to be citizens of the cities that we're a part of. They were called to be citizens of Babylon, even this enemy city. They had to go be faithful, God's faithful presence there. In the public realm, they had to enter into the city's system of politics, of government, of buying and selling and trade and business and being a neighbor there. So what matters is it doesn't matter how much we have in common with the people around us, because the Israelites had very, very little in common with the Babylonians. But God is saying you must share more than geographical proximity with this community. As God's people, you are called, even commanded, not just to be in a shared geographical space or proximity to others, but that proximity is meant to bring the welfare of others into your view. That we are to be a community who seeks the welfare of our city. And it's only by doing this, he actually says, in their welfare, you will find your welfare. So literally, we will not receive all the blessings, all the intentions of God for us if we are not seeking God's intentions for others. If we're not seeking to build up the welfare of our entire city, the shalom, the very goodness that God wants to give all people, even enemies. The third community, so the first is the family unit, the second is the city community in general, but the third community that Jeremiah is referring to is the church itself, the people of God themselves, the gathered people of God. So we may not be the only ones. We aren't the only ones seeking the shalom of our city. We're not the only ones seeking the good, the welfare, the good outcome and flourishing of our city. Many other people are doing that even if they aren't believers. It's not a requirement to be a believer to seek this. Everybody desires this in some way. But we are to seek it. The people of God are to seek it. We have to seek it. So this is challenging for us, and I want to say, just reminding us that we have this building. We've been put on this block. We're an embedded community. What does that mean, or how might we use our building to seek the welfare of our city? And that means more than evangelism. Certainly means that's certainly a part of it, but we're talking about the entirety, the flourishing of our whole city, so that the city might say, those people care about every aspect of our lives, and in the process, they'd come to see that so does God. Now, this theology of place thing is extremely difficult, I think, if you are part of the American middle or upper class. Now, in particular, the richest of the rich and the poorest of the poor they probably understand theology of place a little better than most of the rest of us, because the poor have so little ability to move that everything they know is in a local place. And the same is true for the old rich, the rich who have inherited estates for generation after generation, who have stewarded the same space, or the same land, the same companies for ages. They've had those long-term stuck in the same place, so to speak. One group is not flourishing, the other group may be very much flourishing, but there's a huge middle group, and many of us would fall into this category at Midtown, and it's what we might say are the upwardly mobile. Even in the definition, upwardly mobile, movement, mobile. We're always moving about. The idea is that you move to wherever the greatest opportunities are. And so you and I often, I would say, spend very little time thinking about being planted and rooted by God into a place, being sent by God to that place for a very particular purpose. The Israelites were told it was going to be 70 years before they got out of Babylon, which meant it wouldn't be till their grandkids that they would get out. But they were still called to be a faithful presence, to remain in a place that's very difficult for them, yet seek the welfare of the city. So friends, for you and I, especially if you are upwardly mobile, our whole world is rootless and globalized. We think globally. Everything's about the globalization of everything. Many cities are trying to become global cities, but in the process, who do they try to move out, hide away, shift to different parts of the city? Because to be seen with those unsightly, unseemly things would make our city look bad to the world. Brothers and sisters, we have to go there. We have to go to those places. We have to use our building for those things, because the city is a place where we are to seek its welfare. No matter how upwardly mobile we are, we have to ask our questions. Upwardly mobile, able to move freely and easily, not really tied or connected to any one particular place. We, of all people, most need a theology of place, because so much of our world's anxiety is about being rootless. So many people feel alone and hurting and broken because they are rootless. We know so little about our place. We think little about our homes, our church buildings, and the unique opportunities that we have in our own backyards, on our street, that we are to be concrete resemblances of God to our communities. Look, the point of this is not to bring guilt or shame upon those who move. I just moved here to this city myself, so I don't think moving is bad. In fact, God moved the Israelites into Babylon. Moving isn't bad. The difference is whether God has sent us. Are we moving simply for our own sake, for our own family, just to acquire our own things? Or are we moving when we move, for example, to seek the welfare of the place that we're moving because we are sent by God? What people, communities, and cultures are you and I sent to? The most obvious answer is, well, what communities and cultures are within walking, biking, busing, and driving distance of our church doors? Who passes by our building on a regular basis through walking, biking, busing, and driving? What neighbors are we working side by side with in our city already, in our neighborhood, in our workplaces, in our local community? Who are we working side by side with for the purpose of doing good, specific good to our city, addressing defined problems or specific local struggles? Where might we join our neighbors in working together for the good of the city? And how might our particular building, our particular plot of land, be part of that story? What are the common concerns of our neighbors? What concerns do we share in common with them? And what do our neighbors need? How might our location be a part of meeting the needs of the people around us in our neighborhood, in our city neighborhood? What decisions have we as a local church, whether intentionally or unintentionally, put distance? How have we put distance between us and our neighbors? How have we done that? We may have done that even unintentionally by making certain decisions. Here's just one example I was thinking of the other day. We have a great church sign. You know what would be great is if we actually also on that sign had the times in which we worshiped, because people pass by our building all the time, walking their dog and their kids and driving by after work. But no one has any idea when we actually meet. We have a faith in politics and an election year coming up on Friday, October 3rd, but no one on our street knows about it. And yet we might want to invite people to that, say, what do Christians think about this whole crazy season that we're in? our building could be a place where we welcome people for that. And so there's a lot of other things to think about. Again, there's a handout, and I would invite you to have conversations with your community groups and around your dinner table. Friends, theology of place, it really matters that God has placed us here, that we are called to be his faithful presence in this particular place that he has put us. And we're not acknowledging that wherever we're located, God has called us and placed us there to be his faithful presence, to seek the welfare of the city. How might we be doing that with our building, with our assets, with our own homes, with our workplaces? This is the beginning we want to begin answering those questions together as the people of God, so that we can be the people of God for Indianapolis, for Broad Ripple, for our street, our neighborhood.